Let's get it. Let's get it. What's up, everybody? How's everybody doing today? Yeah. Let's get this going. Welcome, everybody, to the first episode of the Flying Prepper podcast, where we talk about everything emergency preparedness, prepping, and a little bit of flight in there. Why is it Flying Prepper? Because I'm training to be a private pilot, and I don't know, it just sounded cool. So, what are we all about here? Being this first episode, we're all about emergency preparedness, aka prepping. And in this first episode, we're going to kick it off by diving into the basics of prepping, also known as emergency preparedness. So, what are we talking about today? Well, what is prepping? Some of the myths behind preppers, who we are. You know, we're not all conspiracy theorists. We're going to talk about some current events and why everybody should be preparing. We're going to talk about how even the government says we should prepare. So we're going to get this thing kicked off, and we'll get into it. So what is prepping? What is preparedness? You know, I did draw some notes, so if you see me looking down, I did prepare for this a little bit. But before I get into what is prepping and all that, a little bit about myself. My name is JT. I live up here in southeast Wisconsin. I've been here for about 7 years. Kind of bounced around, to a few different states throughout my life. Joined the Air Force right out of high school, so I am in no way, you watch some of these prepping channels of these ex-military Green Beret Marines that have all this tactical training. I was in the Air Force. I had about 3 days of tactical training. I try to be as real as I can. I don't have, secret contacts that tell me inside information about what's going on in the world. I just try to be real with everybody. And why I wanted to get this thing going is because, I watch a lot of preparedness channels. I watch a lot of news and, kind of keep tabs on what's going on in the world. And, I'm seeing a lot of like fluff in the prepping community, especially like on YouTube and stuff, where a lot of them just are pushing fear to push product to make money, because they do this for a living. Like their YouTube channel is their income, and that's understandable. You need to make a living, but when it comes to preparedness, I really don't want to be fear driven, like drive people into this out of fear. There's a lot of stuff going on in the world that causes a lot of people anxiety, which is why a lot of people bury their heads in the sand. And we're going to talk a little bit about the psychology behind all of this a little bit later, but that's a little bit about me. The goal for this podcast is to basically educate and answer any questions, and kind of just talk about emergency preparedness, disaster preparedness, prepping, end of the world, apocalypse preparedness, whatever you want to, it's talk through all that stuff. And for me to have a platform to just like speak my mind, because there's not a whole lot of people in my area I can talk to about this. So in any case, I've been doing this since 2013. So I think when I started my preparedness journey, and I was living in Michigan at the time, there was a huge ice storm, knocked out power for a week, and it was cold. Michigan gets cold. Generators, everything were all sold out like immediately, because everybody's power was out in Michigan with that ice storm, and I was just cold. I had no food. I was poor. I was working at a church in Michigan. I was just poor, and never again. I told myself, you know what, I need to be a little bit more prepared next time. And then I started looking into like emergency preparedness, things like that, and I just, it's a lifestyle, it's a mindset that kind of aligns with my personality. So I started doing that about 2013. So that's a little bit about me, but we're going to get into, what is prepping? What is emergency preparedness? It's a proactive practice of planning and stockpiling essentials to handle disruptions. I guess if I were to put it in in my own definition, whether that be short term or long term, for things like natural disasters, an economic crisis, other emergencies that that have happened, from whether it be man-made emergencies or natural disasters, and we've seen that around the country and around the world these past couple of years. Things are just getting a little bit crazy, out there, and weather patterns are changing. I think everybody feels the weather is just changing. It's mid-June right now, and it's like 60 degrees in Wisconsin. It's kind of brisky, like a light jacket. And typically in the past, it's been warmer, 70s. It just feels like the seasons have shifted like a month. Like, July we'll see June weather, August we'll see July weather, and then when it starts to supposedly cool down in September, October, October still we're seeing like mid 80s, where it should be cooling down. But we're seeing changes in the weather pattern happening. We're seeing a lot of conflict, geopolitical conflict around the world with Ukraine and Russia. That shenanigans still going on, and that's back in the news cycles these past couple weeks with their Ukraine launching their huge drone attack on Russian bombers, and then you have the whole China Taiwan, which has been going. I mean, that's been something that's been talked about for years, but that kind of rhetoric has ramped up, and people are giving a timeline by 2026, China is going to make their move on Taiwan. What's the U.S. going to do? You got the little scuffle that happened with India and Pakistan. You got stuff going on with Israel and Iran. Back here on the home front, recent things, with Trump being as confrontational and as he is, deploying National Guard, federalizing the National Guard to kind of help protect federal buildings in LA and around California because of the protests that are happening against the immigration, basically ICE doing their raids for illegal immigrants, which is what Trump promised. He promised to clean up the immigration system, just a lot of internal strife. Like, there's a lot of things going on. And, to prepare for that eventuality, like for most of us, everything that I just said for most of us hasn't affected us at all. Maybe emotionally it's affected us. Maybe we get anxiety, or maybe we get emotionally upset about some of the things that are happening. But as far as like your day-to-day life, they haven't really affected you much, other than maybe the economic front. The economic front might have might be hurting you a little bit. I think it's hurting everybody. Everything's prices are going up and things like that. But all in all, for the most part, things that are happening haven't affected us yet, which is where preparedness comes in. Like, it's about self-reliance. Like, the likelihood of a foreign invader invading our soil is relatively low. The likelihood of somebody, a foreign actor using an EMP bomb above the U.S. to knock out the power grid, low to medium. There's a lot of threats around that. The likelihood of a foreign actor to launch a cyber attack on our power grid and our infrastructure, moderate. There's some things that I'll hit on. There's some things that I've watched recently that I'm like, that makes sense about our power grid. And to give you an idea, like, a lot of things that I prepare for have to deal around our power grid. And our power grid failing, it's aging infrastructure. It doesn't take much to knock it out. I think back in the 90s, like the whole eastern grid went down for, I don't know, I think it was 24, 48 hours. I don't know. It went down for at least a day or two because a tree branch in Ohio fell on a transmission line, and that caused like a cascade effect to where it eventually, power had to be rerouted, and then something else happened, and basically millions of Americans were without power for like 24, 48 hours because of a tree branch. And the fact that a tree branch can cause that and there's no systems in place to kind of deter and to make up for that, downed power line tells me that, and that was back in the 90s. And we haven't really done anything with our infrastructure as far as like improving it. So I do a lot of stuff, prepare for a lot of things around the grid, because I think it's only a matter of time before it fails. There's a cyber attack on the grid. Solar flare hits. I'm big on the sun and space weather and things like that. We're not going to get into that this episode, but stuff like that is some of the things that I prepare for. But, again, it's about self-reliance. Preparedness is a mindset about self-reliance, having food, water, medical supplies, tools, so you and your family could weather any storm, a storm, natural disaster, power outage, things like that. It's kind of like, I look at prepping as kind of like insurance, right? We all have insurance, car insurance, health insurance, life insurance, all that kind of stuff. You pay for this and you pay a premium to have car insurance and health insurance, and it's there if you need it. So if you never get in a car accident, you're just paying premiums. But if you get in a car accident, it's really nice to have because you're covered. If you have full coverage insurance, your car is covered, their car is covered, their medical expenses are covered, your medical expenses are covered. You pay for it in case you need it. Preparedness is kind of like the same mindset. You're stocking away food, water, supplies, things like that in case you ever need it. And you may never need it, but you might. And especially in today's climate, there's greater chances you might need it, with some of the things going on. So I kind of parallel emergency preparedness prepping with insurance, things like that. But there's a psychology that has always interested me, of people that a lot of people may look at preppers as hoarders, as conspiracy theorists. Some people look at prepping and just don't want to have anything to do with it. Other people just kind of bury their heads in the sand and aren't aware of anything that's going on in the world. And I kind of want to dive into a little bit of the psychology of, the perspectives of prepping here. So like the first mindset, and I know people like this, and is the head in the sand mindset, or like the ostrich effect. And the ostrich effect, the definition, it's a psychological term for a cognitive bias where people avoid or ignore uncomfortable realities like potential disasters or global risks, to reduce their anxiety. Why this happens? Fear of the unknown, feeling overwhelmed, or blind trust in the government / the infrastructure to handle the crisis leads some to dismiss like prepping altogether. And the impact of the ostrich effect with those types of people is it leaves the individuals vulnerable, unprepared for supply chain failures, natural disasters, or other disruptions. And we've seen supply chain stress with what happened with COVID. Toilet paper was not in, you couldn't find it. You couldn't find toilet paper. And there were other things that affected the supply chain. There were shortages on things, and whenever there's shortages, supply and demand, prices go up, things like that. I mean, all of us have felt that before. And we had to weather through all of that. But that was just one incident of supply chain stuff. Now with like the Trump tariffs and things like that, that's affecting the supply chain, and it's a lagging effect. So, that happened a couple, was it March, April, May? I don't know, around there. He did the across the board tariffs to bring countries to the table to negotiate better trade deals. And, there's the China one where like China factories shut down. I don't know if they're going back up again or not, but they shut down for a while. And it's a lagging effect, right? So we won't feel that until later on. I think we may start feeling some of those supply chain, some of that stuff with the factory shutting down in China. We probably are starting to feel some of that, like starting now in June, is my guess. But in any case, back to the perspectives. So you have the ostrich effect. People who just bury their hands in the sand. They don't want to know what's going on around the world. They don't want to know any news. They just want to live their life and be happy, right? And they don't want to anything negative. They just don't want to hear about it, which leaves these types of people vulnerable. And these people are really, really hard to bring into the prepping fold. Not even bring into the fold like we're some exclusive club, but to even educate them. I know a lot of people personally that fall into this category, and you don't have to be a hardcore doomsday apocalypse prepper in order to you don't have to be in that club. But I think a lot of people think, well, if I start stockpiling food, I'm a hoarder and I'm a prepper and I'm a conspiracy theorist. And anyway, so that's the ostrich effect. The next one is misinformation bias, which is like the stereotype of preppers. And I kind of led into it with my last statement, is the stereotype of preppers, or the misinformation bias. The definition is a bias where people rely on skewed media portrayals or assumptions, labeling preppers as paranoid hoarders obsessed with guns, bullets, and conspiracy theories. Now, a lot of us, are late. We're all labeled that way, and we were especially labeled that way before COVID. I think COVID kind of gave us a validation, the preppers a little bit of a validation, because we were all ready for it. We weren't short on toilet paper, so I think the stereotype of preppers has improved since COVID. But it happens because why does people have these like stereotypes of preppers as being these like doomsday paranoid hoarders obsessed with guns and bullets and conspiracy theories? I think it's the sensationalized like TV shows, and movies that kind of amplify the very extreme examples, of preppers, and it ignores like the average prepper's practical approach to the mindset, if that makes sense. And the reality is most preppers aren't doomsday fanatics. They're just normal Americans, teachers, nurses, parents, and we just have a heightened awareness of risks that are happening around us. That's all. That's all it is. So that's stereotype number 2. Stereotype number 3 is the prepper mindset. The proactive resilience. So the definition of the proactive resilience is a practical, forward-thinking approach akin to the preparedness psychology, where individuals assess risks and take actions to mitigate them. That's the educated definition of maybe what a prepper is. We are driven by awareness of real threats: natural disasters, hurricanes, earthquakes, economic instability, EMPs, solar flares, civil unrest, and a desire for self-sufficiency. We assess those risks because 90% of what I just said has happened before. We've had hurricanes, obviously. We've had earthquakes. We've had economic instability. We've Great Depression, 2000 dot-com bubble, 2008. We've seen economic instability. Civil unrest. We've seen civil unrest before. There's history that tells that. We've seen solar flares before. 1879, 1870s, or whatever, the Carrington event. Massive solar flare shot out towards Earth, and fried the telegraph system. We were not an electrified society back then, so it didn't have a huge impact. But solar flares happen all the time, especially during solar maximum, which is what we're in. And if and when a big enough solar flare launches our way, it can take out the entire grid, the entire electric grid, and it's down for years. That's a likelihood. That is a likelihood. It's happened before many of times, just we weren't an electrified society. And with Earth's weakening magnetic field and all that stuff, it heightens the for me, it just heightens the sense of, okay, this could happen any day. And I want to prepare for it. I want to prepare for long-term power outages. So we'll get into more of the sun and space weather because that's what I'm really, really into, but I don't want to dive in too deep on that. So those are the things that we prepare for, and a lot of them have happened before, and a lot of them will happen again. And the mindset is just to be ready when that stuff happens. So it's just like paying for car insurance or home insurance. Preppers, we stock food and water and supplies for security, ready for anything from a temporary blackout to a long-term collapse. The doomsday scenario, the end of society scenario. We prep for the broad spectrum of it, and that's all it is. I want to get into, so that was like the psychology, but there's some myths about prepping that I want to I want to nip in the butt. Myth number one: preppers are all conspiracy theorists. No, we're not. While some preppers follow the fringe theories, most focus on practical risks. FEMA itself, this is the government. FEMA itself encourages preparedness. And 51% of Americans surveyed in 2023 reported being prepared for a disaster. So here's the data. Estimates suggest 4 to 9 million active preppers in the U.S., spanning diverse demographics from Gen Z to your average everyday families, urban, rural folks, and not just the prepper extremists. So there's myth number one. Preppers are not all conspiracy theorists. Myth number two: prepping is just hoarding food, water, guns, and bullets. Here's the truth. Preppers cover 6 core needs: nutrition, hydration, shelter, security, hygiene, and medicine. It's not just stockpiling. It's a skill like first aid, foraging, and planning evacuation routes. So we're not just about stockpiling. We plan, practice, try to bring up skills, try to learn skills. So it's not just about, like I said, stockpiling food and water, but learning skills. How to garden, how to grow your own food. That's not, you can put that in the prepping category, but that's just like cool. Like, if you grow your own food, it's going to save you on grocery bills. It's going to taste better. And you don't need a huge space, especially with today's technology. You got to plant in a bag, for crying out loud, a lot of stuff. So we are not just hoarders and that hoard food, water, guns, and bullets and all that stuff. And there's been a shift in perspective. Like post-COVID, supply chain shortages, toilet paper, baby formula, made prepping seem less like crazy and more sensible to people. So like I said before, FEMA, I'm going to get into FEMA here in a minute, so we'll wait on that. So myth number 3: prepping is extreme and unnecessary. Here's the truth. Prepping is practical. Events like 9/11, Hurricane Katrina, 2020 pandemic showed the value of readiness. Even FEMA updated its recommendation from 72 hours of emergency supplies to a week for self-sufficiency, which is going to lead me into FEMA. So don't take my word for it, or don't take any other YouTube prepping channel's word for it about the need for emergency preparedness. If you're one of those like people that kind of bury their heads in the sand and rely on the government to take care of you, well, here's the government saying, hey, it's going to take us some time to get to you. So until we do, these are the things that you need and you need to do. So I'm actually going to show you FEMA.gov. Let me get to it here. Build Red Kit. Okay, so FEMA.gov. Let's go into FEMA.gov. Let me switch this over to here. Okay, so this is FEMA.gov, and in here they talk about. I went through this. This is actually pretty like there's a lot of information here, but know what disasters and hazards could affect your area, how to get emergency alerts. Like it goes through disasters and emergency, what to do, what to download, the apps to have. It goes through, it has guides. Are you ready? Like they put a lot of work into this website and have listed like all these different things. Like let's go into a power outage, like power outage tips. Here's the power outage may disrupt communication. Here's some tips. Keep fridges and freezers closed. Use a generator only. It has all of these things in here for different types of scenarios. Look, they even have space weather in here. I hit on that a little bit, talking about space weather and what happens with space weather and what it can do and how to prepare. Build an emergency kit. What is an emergency kit? Oh, here's an emergency kit. Here's basic supplies you need for emergency kit: water, food, battery, flashlights, first aid, extra batteries. Like it goes through an entire checklist of things to have, and it'll even give you like a nice downloadable PDF to download of a checklist of things to have. Anyway, so this is FEMA. This is FEMA. This is ready.gov, the government saying, "Hey, listen, guys, we may not get to you in time, so have these supplies." And this is like, if you're on the fence about this whole preparedness thing, I would say start here. Start at FEMA.gov or ready.gov and go through their checklist and just start getting those items. And you don't need to go out and like mass buy all this stuff. Prepping is a slow, methodical thing. Like, it's a mindset, it's a frame of mind. We don't like the difference between people who prepare and hoarders are preparedness preppers will go out when they go shopping, they'll buy in bulk. So when they go to Costco or Sam's Club or anything like that, they'll maybe get a 50-pound bag of rice. And if they get a case of, beans, they might just buy an extra case of beans. And then the next time they go, if they're buying spaghetti sauce, they might get 2 cans of spaghetti sauce. It's a gradual process. Whereas hoarding is going out and literally like emptying the shelves, like going out and you're buying every bag of rice you can find because you're not prepared, and you're literally just hoarding the stuff. Like, because you're not prepared and a disaster hits, you're going out and you're literally buying 17 huge things of toilet paper, like a lot of people were doing because they weren't ready for the pandemic. They didn't realize that toilet paper might have been one of those things that they might want to have a stockpile of. So they went out when they realized, oh, there might be a toilet paper shortage, or they heard on the news, like in Washington, there was a toilet paper shortage. And then they lived in Indiana. They went out to their Costco and like bought like a bunch of toilet paper. That's hoarding. So there's kind of the difference, between all that stuff. So like I said, FEMA, start there, start with ready.gov, get those supplies that you need here. Okay. Where am I at on time? Okay. We're good. We're good. Trying to keep this, we'll wrap this up. So here's some data for you, on prepping, some real data on prepping and the risks. So here's the, I kind of went through the demographics. There are like between 4 and 9 million of us preppers. And a lot of that, is 50% of that was a rise in self-reliance from individuals from like 2017 to 2020 per FEMA. Like, FEMA did this study on people who will admit to be preppers, because there's some of us who don't admit it. We just quietly prepare, and there's some security reasons why we do that. But FEMA did a study, and like more and more people are getting on this. And Generation Z kind of leads that trend in the interest, in that like proactive readiness. Like, Generation Z kind of leads the new, like, people that are coming in and getting this emergency mindset. It's like Gen Z that are kind of leading the way on that. Here are some rising threats. There's a lot of rising threats. I'll just hit a couple. Extreme weather. There are more frequent severe hurricanes. Hurricane Beryl, Idalia, Ian, California wildfires. Texas, had their winter thing where their power grid went down. Obviously, you had Hurricane Helene that ripped through and did a lot of damage there. Like, weather's getting more severe. There's some supply chain issues. We've seen like COVID era shortages, toilet paper, lumber, baby formula, like, that lingered into 2022. But then, with the tariffs and all that, we may see some more supply chain shortages, and it's just, things are rapidly deteriorating. And these are, it's not like this stuff happens overnight. Like, frog in boiling water is the analogy I have. Like, it happens very slowly. And when it happens slowly, it's much harder to really recognize the signals to go, oh crap, like, this is going bad fast, but it's not fast enough to where people like see it. So a lot of this is frog in boiling water. So in any case, that's kind of what I wanted to cover in this first episode. Didn't want to make it too long, about 30 minutes in this first episode. But, the key takeaways I would say is, preppers, we're not crazy. It is practical. It is practical to start prepping. Like, it's pretty practical. So here we go. From ignoring risks to stereotyping preppers, we've explored kind of the psychology. We've busted some myths. Most of us are just average Americans preparing for real threats like disasters, economic shifts, or something worse. It's the same logic as buying insurance. So here's some homework for you. Here's some next steps. Think about your risks and what area are you in that may have some natural disaster risks. Are you close to a nuclear plant? Are you earthquake prone? Are you hurricane prone? Severe weather prone? Tornado prone? Think about that. Power outages. Do you have a lot of power outages? Kind of just think through your area and the risks that carry. Obviously, check FEMA ready.gov for that's a great place to start. There's great YouTube channels out there. City Prepping's one of them. He's got a lot of good stuff for guys that are just for you guys that were just wanting to get into the prepping thing. Go check him out. And then we'll in the coming episodes we'll dive a little deeper into prepping strategies. But I want to kick off this first episode with just just bust some myths. What is prepping? Some psychological things around different people and what they think about prepping. So listen, share your thoughts. Do your preps. Join me next time as we start diving more strategically into prepping. But for now, I'm going to say that's all for me. And until next time, this has been the the Flying Prepper podcast. And my name is JT, and we will see you on the next one. See you guys.